With the Iowa caucuses less than 6 weeks away and Donald Trump leading in the polls, alarm bells of another Trump term and its implications for American democracy are growing louder. This week, the New York Times issued this warning. A second Trump presidency may be more radical than the last one, noting that the forces that somewhat contained his autocratic tendencies in his first term would, quote, all be weaker. And a new special issue from The Atlantic titled, If Trump Wins, lays out the implications and the authoritarian plans of a less restrained second Trump administration. As David Frum explains in the lead essay, they would include putting an end to all federal and state cases against him, pardoning those who tried to overturn the 2020 election, using the Justice Department to exact revenge on Trump's adversaries and critics, ending civil service protections to make it easier to fire federal officials, and deploying the military to shut down civil demonstrations and protests. And Trump is not exactly being secretive about his intentions to act on his most dangerous impulses. During a Fox town hall on Tuesday, when given the opportunity to quash concerns that he would abuse the office of the presidency should he be reelected, he did the opposite.
Under no circumstances, you are promising America tonight you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one.
Except
Look,
what?
he's going crazy. Except for day one.
Meaning?
I want to close the border, and I want to drill,
That's
drill,
not
drill.
That's not retribution.
I'm going to be, you know, he keeps, we love this guy. He says, you're not going to be a dictator, are you? I said, no, other than day one.
Joining me now, David Frum, senior editor at The Atlantic. As I mentioned, he wrote the lead essay for the magazine's incredible special issue, If Trump Wins. He's also author of Trumpocalypse, Restoring American Democracy. And Barbara F. Walter, Rohr Professor of International Relations at the University of California, San Diego, and author of How Civil Wars Start and How to Stop Them. David, Barbara, thank you both very much for coming to the Saturday show. David, let me start with you. It's shocking enough Trump would say he would be a dictator on day one. But how shocking is it that the question even has to be asked?
Well, look at the world from his point of view. It's Inauguration Day 2025. He's taken the oath. What does he confront 2 minutes later? He is, as you said, the target of 4 separate criminal proceedings, 91 counts in all, 2 federal proceedings, 2 state proceedings, plus, in the state of New York, a civil proceeding that will dissolve all of his companies for their many frauds. Now, he faces the risk of being imprisoned for the rest of his life. So, obviously, in survival, the first thing he's going to do is to try to break the federal Justice Department, and then the second thing he's going to do is to try to break state justice proceedings. He has to. So, the problem he presents is the use of presidential power to stop a criminal proceeding is exactly what the Watergate scandal was all about. If this works, we owe a huge retrospective apology to Richard Nixon because Donald Trump is campaigning on a promise to do what Richard Nixon was punished for doing.
And more to your point, because I screenshot this and highlighted it. You write, the existing constitutional system has no room for the subversive legal maneuvers of a criminal in chief. If a president can pardon himself for federal crimes, as Trump would likely try to do, then he could write his pardon in advance and shoot visitors to the White House.
Yeah. He's going to claim a right of self-pardon, but think about it. If the president can pardon himself for criminal offenses, that means he can shoot the first lady. And maybe he's impeached, but nothing. You know what else it means? Even weirder? It means the vice president can pick up a pistol, walk into the Oval Office, shoot the president dead, and say, I'm the president now, pardon. Right. And although, again, maybe there's an impeachment, no criminal penalty. That is so crazy, it can't be right. But that is what we're going to be debating 2 years from now if this man returns to office.
Right. It's incredible that these scenarios that you bring up are, like, they're frightening, they're ghoulish, and yet after one Trump term, my rule of thumb, if you can imagine it, it could possibly happen. So, Barbara, I want you to hear what former Congresswoman Liz Cheney had to say to my colleague Ari Melber about Trump's violent rhetoric and his plans for a second term. Watch.
I think what we as Americans and as voters, as citizens, need to commit to do is not to become numb to that. what he says is so outrageous that it can be very easy for his allies to say to the rest of us, oh, come on, you know that's not true. What the lesson of Donald Trump of the last several years has taught us is we have to take him seriously and we have to take him literally. And he has shown us what he's willing to do.
Barbara, for those who are not paying attention, why do we have to take what Trump says literally?
Because autocrats, first of all, they don't care about peace. They care about power. And oftentimes chaos and instability help them stay in power. It scares people. It convinces them that maybe they prefer security to rights and freedoms, or they want a strong person in power to keep them safe. So we know that countries that backslide into this partial democracy space are really unstable, and they're unstable in terms of leadership. Leadership tends to change very rapidly. They're unstable in terms of policies. There's lots of flip-flopping in what government wants, so it's bad for business. And they tend to be politically violent periods, assassinations, violent demonstrations, increased. Here in the United States, we'd see an increase in militias. Militias are legal in most states around the United States. So these are very, very unstable periods, and it usually helps the wannabe dictator.
David, what other threats does a Trump win pose to the rule of law in this country?
Well, now imagine the scenario where Trump has begun pardoning himself and has begun pardoning January 6 felons and has begun asserting all of these rights. So there's going to be the beginning of movements of protest because, you know, shows like this, people like you and me, we've been telling people, register to vote, don't take politics to the streets, but politics will move to the streets. Trump has said he wants to use the army. You've heard him mention the Insurrection Act. Mm-hmm. What not a lot of people remember is the Insurrection Act was passed during the first George Washington administration. At a time when the United States had no police forces, no FBI, nothing. Since the first George Washington administration, we have passed dozens of statutes and thousands of rules forbidding the military to be used for police work inside the United States. So Trump is going to be issuing orders that every general is going to have to parse and say, is this the kind of illegal order that sends me to prison, or do I have to obey? And you could see a dissolution of the civil military structure. Some generals obeying these illegal orders and using troops in ways that are forbidden by many other laws. Other generals resigning or refusing to obey orders. When Barbara talks about chaos, if it's unclear that the military obeys the president or not, because the president every day is asking it to do something that's illegal, that's chaos.
You know, Barbara, I asked that question because a lot of what Trump is doing is instilling fear. I mean, his whole campaign is based in fear. So how do we combat a fear-based campaign strategy?
Information is really, really key, but we are also at a period of time when information is true information is really hard to come by. It used to be that the networks could get on the air and they had a common cohesive message and they could provide that to the American public. That no longer exists today, and it makes everything much, much more difficult. You know, the media plays a really big role in countering this. Don't give a wannabe autocrat like Trump a lot of airtime. Don't broadcast his message. Don't treat him like every other candidate. You know, the story that's told, the counter narratives that are told, and the time that's given over to his lies versus the truth really, really matters. So I think in this lead up to the 2024 elections, how the media responds, how they inform the American public, how the message that they send about the importance of democracy and the importance of countering it and voting and telling the truth really, really matters.
Mm-hmm. Before we go to a break, Barbara, I'm going to get you one more question here. The GOP is still downplaying Trump's violent rhetoric and actions, but is that because they like his threats, or is it because they are afraid to denounce them? Either way, isn't fear an authoritarian tool?
Yeah. They don't like those threats. I think most of the GOP would prefer if somebody else got the nomination. But they understand increasingly that Trump is going to be their nominee. He is going to be their candidate. And they have to make a choice between backing a Republican candidate or switching sides and backing Biden. And we've seen through Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney that if you do that, your career is essentially over. And so they don't like this. They would prefer to have almost any other candidate running for the GOP. But they don't have a choice because almost half the American public is still solidly behind Trump.
Don't go anywhere. We're going to continue this important conversation with David Frum and Barbara Walter after the break.